And coming up on this week's show, Euston Station, Lord Hendy, now Rail Minister, is accused of getting a railway engineer fired over raising safety concerns when he was chair of Network Rail. We investigate. Shadow Great British Railways is launched, and the Passenger Railway Services Public Ownership Bill enters its final stages in the Commons. An HS2 construction update at Birmingham as tunnelling reaches the halfway point. And Hitachi's battery intercity train begins testing on the national network. And welcome once again to Green Signals from me, Nigel Harris, and
from me, Richard Bowker.
Blimey, Richard, what a week, eh? I think it was Harold Wilson who famously said that a week is a long time in politics. Well, it's been a hell of a long week in rail, hasn't it?
It certainly has.
But before we get into these dramatic events of the last week, we must say our usual big thank you to all these wonderful people who left us super thanks on YouTube this week. And you all are Chris Exley, the Independent Brigline Rail Group, again, regulars, David Hallett, Wacky Racers, Northumberland Coast Loop, Matt Jackson, Rob Staffordian, Mark Woods, Paul Roberts, Robert Walsh, Alan Kirkman, Marilyn Balderston, and John Samson Snell, who gave us a super thanks on behalf of the 4253 Locomotive Company Limited. He said that the 42XX Great Western engine hasn't seen a fire since it was sent for scrap at Barry Island in 1963, but it's almost finished a very long and expensive overhaul, and so it will be hopefully steamy within the next 6 months. I wish you well. I know how that feels. You've done a great job.
They have done an absolutely fantastic job.
And over many, many years, it's just amazing how they keep their interest up, isn't it?
It's extraordinary. I mean, it's commitment, and it's unsung at times, but it's brilliant. We're also delighted to say a big welcome to the following new gold and silver members who've joined us on either YouTube or Patreon this week.
Welcome.
They're Ben and Sophie Patterson, John P. Charlesworth, Adam Jones, Edward Southgate, Damon, Nigel Giles, Mark Woods, Rob Jones, Gordon Hislip, Maxstar 2010, Chris Groves, Mike Keighley, Colin Graham, Dominic Ryan, Soren Christensen, Stephen Ashton, Tom Utley, Paul Best, another Tom, Jeremy Buck, and Steve. And then we also have the gold members, Roddy Jenkins, Richard Hunt, James Trueseeker, and Sean Dixon. We show a full list of all the members at the end of the programme, including those who, in addition, joined as bronze members. So do keep an eye out for a name if you're a member. And if you're not, and you'd like to be and listen to some of the exclusive content we do, then just either click the join button on YouTube or head over to Patreon. The details are in the description to find out about what we offer for members.
Thanks, Richard. And our usual reminder that the show itself will always remain free. What we offer members is exclusive content we posted, and it's gone down very well. And we know that because you've told us. And we've so much more planned. So do have a look at our membership schemes, as we'd love to welcome as many new members and supporters as possible to the programme, which will remain free to watch or listen to. Okay, shall we do this, Richard?
I think we should.
A deep joint breath. Okay, the dramatic news of the last week is the row over Euston, and in particular the furious spat between rail engineer and writer Gareth Dennis and Lord Peter Hendy, former chair of Network Rail and now Minister for Rail. It's really hard to imagine or recall anything that's been played out more in the public arena vis-a-vis the railways than this for quite a number of years. And I know you and Steph have done a brilliant job over many days reading up and analysing the complexities of what's been going on, so much so that we've decided to devote a big part of this week's show to this row. So, how are we going to do it? I will tell you. We're going to unpack this into 4 parts because there are a number of separate threads here, even if they are interwoven. And these threads are 1, Euston Station itself and whether it is safe or unsafe. 2, the news story in the Independent newspaper which kicked off this storm. 3, Network Rail's response and in particular the role of Peter Hendy. And 4, and finally, Systra's decision to sack Gareth and where this whole saga goes next. So let's start with Euston. Now, I know, as many of you do, know the station well, and at various times of day, it's exceedingly unpleasant and extremely crowded. I know it's also an operational challenge at times, not least because of the increase in the number of trains using it compared with when it was first designed in the 60s. But also, and this has been controversial, the gradual encroachment onto the concourse of retail space. But this row really centred on comments as to whether it is not merely unpleasant, but unsafe. So, what have Steph and Richard discovered in many days of diligent research?
Well, let's start with, I suppose, a bit of sort of safety context. In the UK, on the railways, the duty holder is responsible for safety. And the regulator, in this case, obviously, is the Office of Rail and Road, is responsible for ensuring that the duty holder are discharging those responsibilities. Okay, and the principal duty holder at Euston Station is Network Rail. Okay, now we have to go back to September 2023, so literally 12 months ago, when the ORR issued what's called an improvement notice. And that is like an instruction. You will do this, right? And it came about because over the sort of summer of 2023, there was action, what's called action short of a strike by train operators. And there were at least 2 complaints from passengers sent to the ORR. One we know, or we believe, was around the short form of a last train of the day, LNER service, I think it was. And the other was a short boarding window for an Avanti service, which caused or was part of extreme crowding and congestion. So what happened was the ORR then instigated a review and went and had a look, and they were unhappy with Network Rail's crowd management plan at Euston. So they issued an improvement notice, and we'll put a link to that on the site because it had 5 elements. But the summary of it, which the ORR put on their site and their register of improvement notices, was this. They said, Network Rail have failed to implement so far as is reasonably practicable. That's a very important concept.
ALARP.
Well, that's as low as reasonably, but yes, you're absolutely
the
right.
Reasonably practicable thing.
Yeah. So Network Rail have failed to implement so far as is reasonably practicable effective measures to prevent risks to health and safety of passengers and other persons at the station during passenger surges and overcrowding events at London Euston Station. And then there was a kind of a 5-point plan what they had to do. And then what happened was Network Rail, working with the other duty holders like train operators, took the appropriate action, and the improvement notice is marked on the ORR's register as closed out in December 2023. And we understand that was to the satisfaction of the ORR.
And passenger surges is a polite way of describing the stampedes that happen when the lengths of train departure quite late, isn't it? So at this point, by the end of 2023, early 24, we know that issues had been raised at Euston, an inspection had taken place, an improvement notice issued, NR had complied with that as duty holder, and in consultation with other duty holders, including the TOCs, the improvement notice had been closed, to summarise the situation. And in a letter to Ian Stewart, then chair of the Transport Select Committee, by John Larkinson, chief exec of the ORR, on April 23rd, 24, John said, "We are content that the action taken by Network Rail was sufficient for us to close out the notice." Now, that's ORR formally confirming it was happy with NR's response to the complaints. Ian Stewart, then chair of the Transport Select Committee, then wrote to Andrew Haynes, chief exec of Network Rail, on May 8th asking for more detail on the improvement notice and what Network Rail is doing to comply with it. Andrew wrote back to Mr. Stewart on May 15th with that detail. And by the way, we'll put links to all these letters on our website so you can all follow the paper trail, read and judge for yourselves. That's fair summary, Richard?
Yeah, they're very fair. And what we also did, though, was we thought it'd be useful just to get the up-to-date position from the ORR, because it's one thing to say there's an improvement notice and it's been complied with. But safety is a dynamic thing.
A snapshot, isn't it?
You've got to make sure that it's ongoing. So we asked the ORR whether any member of the public or an industry participant or a confidential whistleblower had raised any concern with regards to the safety of Euston Station since the inspection in September last year, or since the date that the ORR had recorded Network Rail had complied with the improvement notice at the end of the year. So has there been anything that's happened since? And the ORR said yes. In fact, they said, we've had several complaints regarding the management of passenger flows in times of disruption. Most recent was an event in June. So that's June just gone. A further site inspection took place in July to check arrangements on site. The inspection concluded risk-assessed mitigation measures were in place and that the arrangements, as seen, were meeting the standard for legal compliance. ORR continue to monitor Network Rail's plans for further improvement through routine liaison. There is further work ongoing to review how the station management conduct proactive and reactive monitoring of controls, particularly through incident learning following times of disruption. Now, that's huge, long quotes, but
Fair
we
enough.
felt we had to read that out to be accurate. But what the ORR is saying is, we went and had a look in July, and the things that Network Rail and everybody else had said they'd put in place as part of the improvement notice are in place, and they are meeting the standards for legal compliance, but there is still more to do. And I think that's the point. None of this means that Euston has stopped being unpleasant or a challenge at times, but it does mean that there was a plan in place to manage it that the ORR were content with, and as recently as July 2024, when they expected again, they believed that was still the case.
Well, absolutely. And I think in John Larkinson's letter, he said to meet the legal obligation. So he's not saying it's turned it into nirvana. He's just saying they're meeting their obligations. Okay, let's move on to the article in the Independent newspaper, which quoted Gareth and which we should note was published on Sunday, April 14th, after the improvement notice had been issued and complied with by Network Rail, but before any of the correspondence with the Transport Select Committee. Yeah. The article is interesting, if a bit over the top, some might say sensationalist, which looks at the history of Euston, talks about the lost Doric Arch and the modernisation of the early 1960s, and how this important terminus has become increasingly inadequate since then as traffic and numbers have grown.
Yeah, there are plenty of quotes from people within the article, but importantly, there are a few from Gareth, okay? He's referenced as railway engineer and writer, but it's this quote that really is the trigger for everything that sort of follows. He's quoted as saying, all of a sudden, that station that once felt large and airy feels like a small shed, Dennis adds. And then the journalist says, and when multiple trains are delayed or cancelled, they quote him again, you're talking about thousands of people squished into that space. It's not just uncomfortable. It's not just unpleasant. It's unsafe. And that last sentence ends up being what we call the pull quote for the headline. I think they say uncomfortable, unpleasant, unsafe or something, but it becomes the headline for the entire piece.
It's a sort of quote a sub wouldn't be able to resist. Okay, but many people have said that Gareth is just raising legitimate safety concerns, and many have pointed out to his duty as a professional engineer to do precisely that, perhaps even by whistleblowing, Richard.
Yeah, well, professional engineers do have a duty. We checked with the Engineering Council and the Royal Academy as to see what their statement, I think it's called a joint statement of ethics, and talks about duties. But I think here, the issue has been confused by some people think that what was going on was whistleblowing, and there's been the suppression of whistleblowing. Now, we don't believe it is. And actually, Gareth, in a fairly extensive tweet that he put out over the weekend of the end of August, beginning of September, he says the same, actually. He says what he said to the Independent, and this is the quote, isn't whistleblowing. It isn't contingent on the ORR improvement notice, though I refer the Independent to it. It is a statement of a condition in the station inherent to a lack of strategic investment in our railways over the last half century or more. So he's saying it's kind of, that statement is kind of very generic, and talking about the inherent state of the station. I think that's a bit of verbal gymnastics, if I can call it that. He is quoted as saying that Euston is unsafe, and that's quite definitive, really.
Yeah, there's no potentially in front of it, is he? He just says it is unsafe. And we should talk about whistleblowing and safety concerns, because we have seen plenty of comment on social media and Twitter in particular, with people saying, I'm not sure I want to raise any concerns in future now in case I get into trouble. It is really important to make crystal clear that there are multiple formal routes for those wishing to raise concerns and whistleblow, including Network Rail's Speak Out policy. CIRAS, that's CIRAS, the Confidential Incident Reporting and Analysis Service for the transport sector, and contacting ORR directly. They're all confidential. They're all specifically designed to legally protect the individual and get stuff addressed quickly. So please, please, please don't feel constrained about speaking out. If you see something that's not right, there are ways to get that message across, and in a way that you will be protected. Indeed, the gov.uk website says if you report your concern to the media, in most cases, you'll lose your whistleblowing law rights. So follow the confidential routes that are specifically there to protect you, to make sure you aren't fired, for example. We don't know whether Gareth has raised concerns about Euston using any of those routes. They're confidential, as we've said. But in the Independent article, Gareth makes a quote directly to the media about his opinion on Euston Station safety today. That is a different thing.
Yeah, it is a different thing. It is worth noting, in the interest of absolute balance and fairness, Gareth does not believe that his quote to the Independent that Euston is unsafe is a problem, or it should have caused the problem it has. One of the things he said over the weekend included this. He said, I called out the claustrophobic lack of vision for those deciding what the future of Euston Station should be. And that's it. It's extremely tame, i.e. the quote in the Independent. I don't call out individuals. I don't call out Network Rail. I point out issues that everyone who uses Euston regularly knows. I think the challenge with that is, and there'll be a lot of people on social media going, yeah, absolutely. But the problem is, Gareth is a talented, he's an experienced engineer. He's got a substantial media profile in the rail sector, but obviously in the wider media as well on rail matters. And he went on record and said it's unsafe. And I think a lot of people would say that's not tame. And since Network Rail is the duty holder, I think it's quite difficult to argue he's not calling out Network Rail. But it is very important to say that Gareth has put that explanation, if you like, on what he said.
As you say, though, he's a gifted engineer, and so his words carry heft, don't they? Okay, let's move on to what Network Rail did. And this is where the drama really starts to unfold, because former chairman Lord Peter Hendy, now Rail Minister, gets personally involved. Do you think he was right to do that, Richard? Walk us through the chain of events as you've exposed it, if you like, in your forensic look at exactly what happened and, crucially, when.
Yeah, well, we've been really held by the fact that so much is in the public domain. And we've had to ask a few organisations a few questions, as you would expect us to, but a lot of this is in the public domain. So this is an opinion, but I do think Network Rail had a legitimate concern.
Yes.
Why? Because as you've just said, Gareth is a competent and experienced railway engineer. He's in a position of responsibility, and he's got a media profile where he is considered a credible authority on matters relating to rail. He's not just a member of the public. He is who he is, which is a sort of a serious person and a credible commentator. So that's the first thing. He's also an employee of one of Network Rail's contractors and consultants who themselves have been involved in safety critical sort of design and engineering work. We know that. So I think Network Rail were right to flag this to Systra, and to ask them to confirm whether Gareth was or was not speaking with Systra's knowledge and or endorsement. And I think actually Network Rail might have been criticised for not seeking that clarification, because this was kind of out there. Now, some have said that Peter Hendy should not have been the one to raise such questions, right? He's the chairman, but he's on the board safety committee, and he's the chairman of the whole shooting match, really. So you'll form your own view on that. Whether his language was appropriate is separate. I mean, it certainly is blunt at times.
It is.
But the smoking gun that everyone is pointing to or saying is a smoking gun is the letter that Peter Hendy wrote to Nick Salt, who is the CEO of Systra, on the 14th of May, 2024. And the big issue is the last paragraph where Peter Hendy says, and of course, finding a potential supplier criticizing a possible client reflects adversely on your likelihood of doing business with us or our supply chain.
Ouch. That
sentence, and again, this is an opinion, adds precisely nothing to what has gone on before in the letter. I think it's unnecessary. It's capable of significant misinterpretation. Many, of course, have said that it's a clear threat instruction to Systra, do something about Gareth, get rid of Gareth, whatever. It doesn't say that. But because of its ability to be misinterpreted, I think it was really ill-judged, and that should not have been written.
I tend to agree. Well, I do agree. Nick Salt replies, though, and seems to give Peter what he's looking for: an apology and confirmation that Gareth was not speaking with the authority of the company, which, of course, is Systra. Now, we've seen the email from Nick Salt to Peter because it's one of the many things that Gareth very helpfully posted on Twitter, in which Nick says the following. We should just say that what follows is an extract, and it is redacted in places. That's with bits taken out. But it's pretty obvious what is behind the redactions in this quote. Quote, by way of an update, says Nick, I can confirm that, redacted at this point, but it obviously refers to Gareth, did not see any safety issues that posed an immediate threat to the safety of people using or working at the station, which is Euston, of course. Nick explains that Gareth had been in contact with Network Rail as a member of the public, and the discussions included some suggestions to help, and that his comments were taken out of proportion by the journalist. Finally, Nick says, I have already confirmed, but I will repeat that we did not endorse what was written.
When you read that, Nick Salt clearly spoke to Gareth before sending that email. Or somebody at Systra spoke to Gareth before that email was sent. So it's reasonable to assume that Gareth did confirm that he didn't see any specific safety issues that posed an immediate threat. And yet, the quote in The Independent is, it's unsafe. So there is a kind of inconsistency issue there. I imagine, that's why Peter Hendy's not satisfied. We don't know that for certain. And also, Nick has used the language that Gareth is a member of the public. And I would have sympathy with someone who said, well, no, not really, not when it comes to matters of rail safety. So that is a challenge.
Right, Richard, down to the essentials. Has Peter Hendy overstepped the mark? Did he try to bully Systra into taking action, specifically sacking Gareth?
Well, he's clearly angry. And we've seen the letter he wrote to Systra. But of course, there's been a lot of emails found subsequent to that under what's called the FOI, the Freedom of Information Act process. And they show Peter pushing and wanting to find out what's been done and whether sort of action has been taken, whatever that means, right? So, it does show an organization, somebody wanting to know that something has been looked into. And it's, it's fairly direct. It's a fairly direct approach. It doesn't. There's not a lot of flowery language in it. But actually, even after all of that, because people will form their own views on it, unless Systra are then weak in how they go on to handle this, neither Peter Hendy nor anyone at Network Rail can coerce a third party into dismissing somebody. The contract of employment is between Gareth Dennis and Systra, and it's actually, frankly, not of anybody else's business. So, should he have used the language he did in that original letter, that last bit? I don't think he should. But ultimately, this is down to what Systra do.
So, in which case, that's a convenient point to move on to Systra, because we soon learn that they have suspended Gareth in this saga. Yet the next thing we learn is that he's been fired for gross misconduct. That's one hell of a leap, Richard, from suspension to firing for gross misconduct. What on earth's gone on there?
Yeah, it is a big leap. And so this is an area where we were having to sort of scratch our heads a bit, really. So first of all, got to say, Gareth has, again, helpfully published something, this time his suspension letter from Systra. It's not really out of the ordinary as far as I can see. It says there's been a complaint, that there will be an investigation. It makes clear that the suspension itself is not actually part of the disciplinary process, though, of course, if an investigation were then to follow, if an investigation were then to find grounds for disciplinary action, then presumably that would then follow. But it feels sort of like fairly straightforward.
It's a perfectly standard HR letter in those circumstances, isn't it? Right, but as I said, since the next thing we hear is that Gareth's been fired, presumably there's been a fairly extensive investigation. I know we asked Systra, and whilst understandably they said no comment and have yet to make any substantive comment on all this, they did confirm that a thorough investigation was carried out.
Yeah, it's worth just saying that, I don't think that reflects poorly, really. They've got to do things in a certain way. But actually, we also heard over the weekend in an article that was on the BBC website that there was a deal offered, right? So the BBC reported that Systra offered a lump sum payment and a reference to Gareth in return for Gareth. The BBC said signing a confidentiality agreement, but I'm going to assume it's like a settlement agreement that covers all of that sort of stuff. And again, that's bog standard. It happens up and down companies all the time. But because we hadn't got that much out of Systra, as you've just alluded to, we asked Gareth himself, right? And he was extremely helpful.
He was.
Now, Gareth told us that his suspension was the 20th of May, but the offer of a settlement was not only factually correct, i.e. they did make one, but it came the very next day on the 21st. And so Gareth said this, right? The settlement offer came first before any disciplinary process. And then he said, the disciplinary then progressed alongside grievances I placed and then appeals for both the disciplinary and the grievance. Then finally, confirmation of dismissal late on in August. The investigation, which he puts in quotes, just consisted of a single hearing in which I was asked only to confirm the material facts. There was no opportunity for discussion of the reasoning behind gross misconduct, which I challenged myself and through my union. Right. So that's what Gareth has told us about the process of suspension followed immediately by a settlement offer.
It is bizarre, Richard, isn't it? That point you made earlier just is worth letting sink in, that he was suspended on the 20th of May, and then an offer to pay him off with a confidentiality agreement, call it what you will, came the day after.
Yeah, I agree. That had us all going, sorry. Yeah.
So that's a fact of the matter. And of course, Gareth declined the offer of a deal, which presumably is why it moved to dismissal. That's a really big decision, though, Richard. Surely. Do you think they had grounds for doing that?
It's a huge decision, Nigel. I mean, look, I personally, and I think most sort of sensible people, put a very high bar on a dismissal for misconduct.
We do.
Why? Well, there's three reasons. Number one, and probably the most important, not probably, it is the most important. You're talking about a person, a human being, possibly, quite probably with a family, and in this case, there is a family and a very, a young one at that, relatively early on in their career, possibly a mortgage, I don't know. But this is a person with a future career, so great care has got to be taken. The obligation on the employer in this respect is very high. Second, the person doing the dismissing actually is quite a burden, right? It's not as big a burden as it is the person that is being dismissed, but it's still a thing, and you've got to bear that in mind. And then third, dismissal often has repercussions, has consequences. There might be a claim for wrongful dismissal or whatever, and that creates more process and uncertainty and distress for kind of everybody. So the bar's got to be really high. And I'll be honest, and this is, it's opinion. I know we do not know everything. We've not spoken to everybody because we can't, and we haven't seen everything. But I look at this with two things. I do think that a mistake was made in that interview with the Independent and being as bold and direct as that quote was. But notwithstanding that, my instinct is that a warning, possibly a final warning, was probably the most appropriate course of action. Dismissal feels, on the evidence of what we've seen, to be a punishment that's at the very end of the scale, and I'd go as far to say disproportionate to what we can see here.
I agree. So let's summarise the whole thing and what happens next, because it has been a tortuous procedure and a sequence of events. But, in words of one syllable, it just feels like a mess.
Well, I think in words of one syllable, it is a mess. I agree. How to summarise it? I do think Gareth misspoke to the Independent, by being so black and white instead of a little bit more contextualised, if I can call it that.
If only he'd put the word potentially in front of unsafe.
Well, it just created a sense of absolutism with regards for safety. Now, I doubt that was his intention, actually, but you can see how it came across when it was sort of written in black and white. So that's first thing. Second thing, this is not about brushing safety under the carpet or a failure of the whistleblowing process. It hasn't been used here. Issues have been raised at Euston by people. An improvement notice had been issued and addressed. The OR have said as much. And that's a dynamic process, and they've confirmed that they're content at the moment that it's ongoing in terms of its management. Network Rail, I think we're entitled to go, hang on a minute, are you saying, is one of your people saying that it is unsafe? And I don't think it's reasonable for Gareth to be portrayed as just a member of the public, given his skill, his competence, his professional qualifications, and so on. But the language that was used by Peter Hendy was pretty heavy, and that last sentence in the letter of to Nick Salt was just really ill-judged, in my view, because it's open to so many interpretations. And then finally, Systra, who are the employer, right? They're the person who's responsible for employing Gareth. The process seems a bit unusual in terms of its sequencing and the fact that settlement seems to have come so quickly after suspension. And the punishment feels, to me, excessive in the circumstances. And based on what we've seen, I've got to say, and that is got to stress that, based on what we've seen, it just seems a disproportionate outcome. I think, excusing the vernacular here, I'd probably have gone down the extreme bollocking route, with an arm around the shoulder at the same time to say, hey, can I just explain why this was not right?
Yeah. Rather
than the route they did.
That sounds entirely fair, Richard, and I agree with every word of that. So, what happens next? I suppose the answer is, who knows? The Prime Minister's spokesman has said that he has full confidence in Peter Hendy as a rail minister. Gareth and his supporters, on the other hand, are loudly and persistently calling for Hendy to resign or be sacked. Boil it right down, Richard. Do they have a point? Should Gareth have been sacked? Should Hendy lose his job?
There is a great deal of emotion in all of this, and I have to say, I do really feel for Gareth at a human level because of what's happened. Do I think Peter Hendy should be dismissed for this? We don't have any evidence. I haven't seen any evidence that he or anybody at Network Rail said, sack that person. Okay. So I think he's been, as we've said, some of the comments are ill-judged, but I think that would be a big call, right? I think that would be a big call, and not on the basis of what I've seen. But equally, should Gareth have been dismissed? I think that's quite clear-cut, frankly, in my opinion. On the basis of what we've seen, I think it's a disproportionate response. And if you said, put it into one word, would I have done it? Then based on what I've seen, no.
And that's where we're up to at the moment. Doubtless this is going to come back, and we will be we'll be covering it again, and I'm certain we'll get plenty of feedback from viewers and listeners, and we'll cover that as well. In parting, I think my view, and I suspect you will agree, Richard, is just to stress again that if you have any safety concerns, if you're a member of the public or about the railways, certainly if you're a railway staff, use one of the formal procedures for whistleblowing, as it's known. Cyrus in particular, it will ensure that it is confidential, it is dealt with promptly, and you will be protected. You won't be fired. Okay? You agree?
Oh, I do. Absolutely. If what comes out of this is a concern that people don't want to call things out anymore, that would be really bad. So
absolutely,
totally agree with everything you said. Yeah.
Okay, let us move on. Over to you.
Right. Well, as if one kind of political issue wasn't enough, we had another one. Literally, as we were sitting down to record this, Labour, the Labour's railway public ownership bill, has sort of reached the final stages in the Commons, and Louise Haigh took the opportunity to announce the creation of Shadow Great British Railways,
SGBR.
I mean, it was a strange. I won't lie, it was a strange announcement. She said, I'm creating Shadow GBR, and I've instructed Alex Hines, who's the Director General responsible for Railway Services, the DFT, Andrew Haynes, who's the Chief Executive of Network Rail, and Robin Gisby, who's the Chief Executive of Directly Operated Holdings Railways Limited. I think I've got that.
The OLR.
Right. I've instructed the three of them to kind of set it up as a shadow body. And I thought, well, it's a bit weird because they're doing what they're doing at the moment. So it was, I probably need to have a bit more of a think about it, if to be honest, but it was kind of a bit of an announcement that wasn't an announcement in a way. But maybe there's some more to come.
But for me, as a journalist, I was scanning the announcement for who's running it. When British Energy was announced, or when the SSRA was announced, it was Alistair Moore. There's always an announcement of who's going to lead it, but there wasn't one, or what it's going to be. So it was, where's the beef? It was just a very odd announcement, I thought.
I can't disagree with that. And look, let's just hope that something else comes out soon gives a bit of clarity, because really this just a bit feels like the thing we said we're going to do, we're still doing, and the people who were kind of running the three main component parts are still running the three main component parts. I mean, it was a bit of a non-thing. Really.
Or is there going to be a brass plaque on the wall that says Hines, Haynes and Gisby?
There's a thought, isn't it? Or Gisby, Haynes and Hines. I mean, that's all those debates will no doubt now see. Look, they're all good guys, right? I mean, because we've got Alex Hines at the DFT, we've got three people who've got railway through and through, and they're committed, and they're, so let's give it let's see what it is. But so far, it did seem a little bit odd.
But we can always give them a ring and say, so what's it going to be, guys? And we'll report back on their replies.
Indeed so.
So, right, moving on to this week's Railway News Roundup. Another HS2 construction update this week. Tunnelling into Birmingham has reached the halfway point. The 1,600-ton tunnel boring machine, TBM, named Marianne, has excavated and built 1.75 miles of the Bromford Tunnel between Water Orton and Washwood Heath in Birmingham. The TBM is 40 metres underground. That's deep, isn't it? And having excavated under Park Hall Nature Reserve in the River Tame, it is now passing under Castle Vale, from where it will continue adjacent to and under the M6 before it breaks through at Washwood Heath early next year. Meanwhile, tunnel segment casting in concrete has been completed at Packadar on the Isle of Grain. Almost 60,000 concrete tunnel ring segments have been cast for HS2, which are being used to construct the Northolt Tunnel West, now almost 80% complete. And these are the things they push out to the tunnel walls after the TBM's gone through, isn't it, to create the tunnel. The segments are installed by those TBMs once it's been excavated and create an inner and outer lining for the tunnel. The segments weigh about 7 tons each. And the final one was cast by a husband and wife team of Lubna and Sard, who are among 180 people working on site every day.
It's great, that, isn't it? What did you do? What did you do today, love? Oh, well, I helped you kind of cast a tunnel segment. I think that's fantastic.
It certainly is. I wonder if it'll have a little plaque on it when they stick it in the wall.
Well, I hope so. That would be really good.
Here's a little side issue. If you go to Peterborough Station, turn left onto the platform, there's a plaque on the mast that says, I think it's the last mast, or no, the first mast in the electrification of that thing. Frank Patterson.
There you go. Some more open access news. My favourite topic. Arriva Grand Central has submitted an application to the ORR for extended track access rights up to 2038.
Good grief.
They've been operating on the East Coast Main Line since 2007, and they're seeking this extension so that they can invest in a fleet of new bi-mode trains to replace their 24-year-old Class 180 Adelantes.
I wonder if there'll be 5 cars.
I think an early job for Hines, Gisby and Haynes, I think there were.
That's yet another order for those 3 names. They'll keep
deliberately so.
They'll keep coming.
We are balanced.
We absolutely are. Hines HGH. There you go. Anyway, just after we published last week's show, ASLEF and LNER, a bit surprisingly, very quickly, suddenly announced that the strike action that was due to start last weekend had been called off because a resolution has been reached. Hooray. ASLEF says the decision to call off the strikes followed meetings between them and LNER, and let's hope that this puts this one to rest, at least for the foreseeable, eh? It looks like LNER have agreed that managers will no longer routinely drive trains as part of regular rosters, which seems like at least a partial victory for ASLEF.
Yeah, but you know what? I sense from some of the drivers we've spoken to, they're just so relieved it's sorted. So it's kind of, it takes 2. So well done, everybody.
Yeah,
kind of let's move on, sort of thing.
I had 2 things in Intel, which you take it as you hear it. One was just that the drivers' mess rooms were actually uncomfortable with another range of strikes and weren't happy with it. And the other is just political tittle-tattle, I guess, that Louise Haig had them both in and said, just sort it out.
It's got sorted out. So well done, everybody.
Yes.
Another bit of news, Hitachi's battery train, which we went and had a look at.
You did?
Yeah, we did. We went and had a look at that. It's now begun testing. Begun. Do you know what? It's normally you that can't get your teeth.
I know, that's why I'm laughing. It is normally me.
Yeah, let me try again. It has begun testing on the national network after successful low-speed running at Newton Aycliffe. The battery technology is going to be trialled between York and Manchester Airport and Leeds to Liverpool Lime Street for the next 8 weeks, which are pretty sensible because they're kind of trialling it on gradients, aren't they? There's a new livery on the train to celebrate the collaboration between TransPennine Express Angel trains in Hitachi, so you'll certainly be able to recognise it if you see it out and about. The next stage is going to test the battery's ability to improve performance on hills. Oh, there you go, over the Pennines. Regenerative charging via braking, fuel and emission savings, and zero emission battery mode in stations. Brilliant, really good to see.
It is, and also how nice to see it being tested at Newton Aycliffe, which for those who don't know is actually part of the original Stockton and Darlington Railway, which celebrates its 200th anniversary next year. I'm sure Stevenson would have been delighted to see the innovation still taking place on the railway. And Alan Morton, Andrew Normansell, among others on Twitter, sent us the news that ScotRail is to begin the process of replacing its high-speed trains, its IC125s. We'll have more news on that once the procurement notice is published in detail. I wonder if we'll have level boarding.
Please. How can you buy trains without level boarding? Anyway.
Well, we've got that in early then, haven't we? Green Signals has run that flag up the flagpole, and we'll see if they salute. And that's the Railway News Roundup this week. If you want to send us any snippets, you can drop us an email at news@greensignals.org, or like the HST, if you've got any big stories you can tell us. We can't promise to read them all out, but the best ones we will, and we'll always name check whoever sends us an email that we read out. And please don't assume we'll have heard it, even if it's a big story, because sometimes we just don't in our little Lincolnshire and Wiltshire bunkers.
You're struggling there.
I nearly said Gloucestershire again then and got another bollocking, but there you go.
Absolutely would have done. Right, shall we do the quiz?
Yes, speaking of bollockings, go on.
Unbelievable. Anyway, last week's question I thought was a little bit easier. It was a good one, and it was a listener question. So thanks once again to Chris Cook.
Chris Cook, wasn't it?
And it was this: where on the GB rail network would you find 5 consecutive stations on a line, each of which has at least one occurrence of the letter Y in their name? And when travelling in the up direction, where would the next closest one be? Which, of course, meant the next closest one with a letter Y in its name. Okay. Now, there were multiple answers.
I'm agog.
Well, no, there were, because people are really smart.
They are. Smarter than me.
We found 4 answers. I'll tell you what they are briefly. 2 in England. So the one that Chris had originally pointed out to us, which is Ainsford, Swanley, St Mary Cray, Bickley and Bromley South, with the next station in the up direction being either Peckham Rye or Sydenham Hill, because you can go either way. So that was one. Then somebody very smart and enterprising found Whiteleaf, Kenley, Purley Oaks, South Croydon, with the next station with a Y in the up direction being East Croydon. That was brilliant. There's a Scottish one, which was North Queensferry, Dalmeny, Edinburgh Gateway, South Gyle, Haymarket, with the next station with a Y in the up direction being Edinburgh Waverley. Yeah, at some point it pointed out there was another one, which was Wallingford further down. But anyway, no, that was sufficient. The most controversial one was the Welsh one, which was Pontypridd, Abercynon, Quakers Yard, Merthyr Vale, and Trode E. Now, I can't pronounce it. Is it Trode E Rue or Re? I'm not sure. But all those 5 have a Y in it. But there was a catch. So quite a lot of people said the next station with a Y in is Rhadir. But it's not, because it is not in the up direction. Curiously, and I don't know whether this is the Taff Vale Railway or whatever, the Welsh Valleys up is not towards Cardiff. It is literally up the valley. So the next station with a Y in the up direction is actually Merthyr Tydfil. Now, some people got it right and pointed out why it was right.
I did not know that.
No, it's brilliant. And I did check it with the excellent Martin Brailsford, who edits Quail Maps. So those 4 were legit. There were a couple of other attempts, but they weren't right for various reasons. But those are the 4. And the winner, a lot of people entered. The winner this week is Simon Wadsworth. So, Simon, if you could just drop us an email at info@greensignals.org, let us know where you would like us to send you a mug. We will do so. Well done, Simon.
Interestingly, side issue, there must be a point somewhere down toward Cardiff where the polarity changes those up and downs, mustn't there? And an up
if somebody knows. Yeah, it must be.
There must be an up becomes a down, and a down becomes an up, which must be bloody confusing for the signalman at the point of changeover.
Yeah, one person, incidentally, actually gave us Welsh station name spellings on the same line and was almost right, except they got the up and the down wrong. There you go. Anyway, to this week's quiz.
That was a good one. I enjoyed that.
It was a brilliant one.
Yeah,
So, Chris
Cooks.
thank you. You're
let us have
genius.
more, Chris.
This week's is a pretty easy one this week, but we thought we'd have a bit of a relax after last week. Where on the GB Rail network can you find two adjacent stations where to travel between them by road would take around 10 times longer than travelling by rail? Now, there's one that I'm fairly confident with. I think there could be some others, so we'll see what people come up with. But if you think you know the answer, just email quiz@greensignals.org. You have until midday on Saturday, the 7th of September. We'll put all the correct answers in the digital hat and select one out at random.
I only just stopped myself blurting out an answer then, because for the rare occasion I thought I might have known an answer, but I didn't.
Fair. Okay.
All right, good news. This is an impressive story to finish on, which was sent to us by James Barlow, Chief Engineer on the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway. Now, the Worth Valley Line has closed part of its 5-mile route for 3 weeks to complete its biggest ever volunteer-led project, a £1.25 million bridge replacement. Bridge 27, which is 135 years old, carries the Worth Valley Line over Bridge House Beck, which is one of the River Worth's main tributaries. The bridge is actually 2 separate structures that use the same foundation. One carries the line into Haworth Yard, so I know exactly where we're talking about, and was upgraded in the 1970s. The other carries the Keighley and Worth Valley's main line, and was in desperate need of renewal because of the poor condition of the supporting abutments, midstream pier and iron girders. This project has been in the planning for 10 years, but with £1 million awarded from the government's Community Ownership Fund, which is all part of the Levelling Up programme, it's finally been possible. So well done, everybody. And all being well, the line will fully reopen on September the 21st with a new bridge in place. Maybe we can find a picture of it for YouTube viewers next time.
Well, I'm delighted to say we do actually have some pictures that James sent through. It's extraordinary. I mean, it's all been done by volunteers. I just find that, I mean, James says they've had some
money,
sort of external professional support, but wow, fair play. Well done.
A bridge replacement by volunteers has got to be something special. Well done, the Yorkshiremen, of course, luxury. We'll do it ourselves.
You're on thin ice now with 2 Lancastrians having a go. So I would stop there if I were you.
I wasn't having a go. I was being complimentary.
Yeah, nobody will believe that for a minute.
No,
so I'd move on.
I shall shut up and move on. And sadly, that's all we've got time for this week. It's been a fairly challenging one, hasn't it, Richard? Thanks so much for watching, listening. Please give us a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're not already a member, do click that join button on YouTube or head over to Patreon to find out what's on offer. But most importantly, do join us again next week for the main show, which we will keep saying is free for everyone to watch or listen to. And we'll hopefully see you then. So until then, it's goodbye from me, and
it's goodbye from me.
Thanks ever so much for being with us.